an ancient Native American burial ground hidden for centuries beneath Oklahoma soil. A sacred artifact that would bring the Smithsonian director and tribal elders in unmarked vehicles to a failing cattle ranch. All discovered by one grieving. Widow's reluctant inheritance and the mysterious stone chamber that would force historians to rewrite America's founding story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist hung heavy over the neglected pastures as Rebecca Blackwood's worn boots sank slightly into the soft earth. She walked the perimeter of what was now legally hers, a 340-acre cattle ranch in Cherokee County, Oklahoma, scheduled for tax auction in just 5 days if she couldn't make the overdue payments. At 42, Rebecca had never imagined herself as a rancher. The property had been listed with 3 different agents over the past year, its price dropping monthly as potential buyers were scared away by reports of failing wells, unexplained cattle, deaths, and a disturbing history of ownership turnover that had locals whispering about curses. "You really should consider letting it go to auction," said Michael Deerfield, her late husband's best friend and attorney, who'd accompanied Rebecca on what was her 4th visit to the property since James's sudden death 8 months ago. "The insurance money won't last forever, and this place has bankrupted 3 families before James bought it." Rebecca's husband of 15 years had died of a heart attack while working alone in the ranch's old stone barn. By the time she'd found him, it had been too late. The paramedics said he'd been dead for hours. Now, instead of the comfortable retirement they'd planned in the small college town where she taught anthropology, Rebecca faced mounting debts, a property she couldn't maintain, and the crushing weight of grief that made even the simplest decisions feel impossible. "I know it doesn't make financial sense," Rebecca replied, studying the property listing on her tablet for the 100th time. Cherokee County Ranch, 340 acres, historic homestead 1843, original stone barn, $235,000 starting bid. Property sold as is. No inspections permitted due to ongoing tribal land claim investigation. The last line had worried potential buyers, but Rebecca had researched the claim. It appeared to be a routine filing by the Cherokee Nation about water rights that affected dozens of properties in the county. Nothing that should significantly impact the ranch's value. "I can't explain it, Michael, but I feel like I owe it to James to at least try. He poured everything into this place. He was so certain it would turn around." Michael shook his head, kicking at a fallen fence post. "That was James always chasing some dream. But Rebecca, you've already spent half the insurance money just keeping up with the mortgage payments. The repairs alone would bankrupt you." Rebecca had done her calculations. Between her husband's life insurance, her professor's salary, and a loan against her retirement account, she could hold on to the property for maybe 6 months. If she could establish a working ranch with guided tours focused on the historical aspects of the property, maybe develop a research station partnering with her university's archaeology department, there was a small chance of making it sustainable. The ranch had been one of the first homesteads in the territory, built by a mixed-race family with Cherokee and European ancestry during a turbulent period in Oklahoma's history. "Have you heard from your department chair about using this place for field research?" Michael asked as they approached the old stone barn where James had died. "Dr. Littlefeather is interested, especially given the original owner's connection to both settler and Cherokee communities. But the university needs more than just historical significance to invest resources." Rebecca pushed open the heavy wooden door, wincing at the familiar creak that now carried painful memories. The barn's interior was cool and dim, with sunlight filtering through gaps in the stone walls. James had begun renovations, stripping away decades of hasty repairs to reveal the original craftsmanship beneath. Stone walls nearly 2 feet thick, hand-hewn beams of oak that had darkened with age, and an unusual circular design that differed from typical frontier construction. James always said this barn was special, Rebecca murmured, running her fingers along the stone wall. He'd get so excited about the construction techniques, how they combined European methods with indigenous knowledge. He was always finding meaning in things, Michael said gently. But meaning doesn't pay the bills. Rebecca moved deeper into the barn, toward the area where they'd found James. She'd avoided this specific spot during previous visits, but today something drew her forward. The flagstone floor here seemed different, the stones larger, more deliberately placed than in other sections. Did James ever mention anything unusual about this particular area? She asked, kneeling to examine the floor more closely. Michael joined her, frowning. Not that I recall. Why? These stones aren't consistent with the others. See how they're fitted together? Almost like they're covering something. Rebecca traced the outline of one particularly large stone that seemed slightly raised at one edge. Probably just settling over time, Michael suggested. These old buildings shift constantly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Rebecca wasn't listening anymore. Her trained eye as an anthropologist had caught something else, a faint pattern carved into the stone's edge, nearly invisible beneath years of dirt. She brushed away the grime with her fingertips, revealing what appeared to be a small spiral symbol. "Hand me that water bottle," she said, pointing to Michael's backpack. When he complied, she poured a small amount over the symbol, washing away more dirt. The spiral became clearer, along with what appeared to be a small depression next to it. "There's something here, Michael. This isn't random." Her heart was beating faster now. James must have noticed this. Maybe this is why he was so interested in the barn. "Rebecca, don't get your hopes up. It's probably just an old mason's mark." But Rebecca was already examining the surrounding stones, finding more faint symbols that formed a pattern. Her years of fieldwork in Central America had trained her to recognize intentional markings, and these had purpose. She pressed gently on the spiral symbol, feeling something give slightly beneath her fingers. "There's a mechanism here," she whispered, excitement temporarily displacing her grief. She applied more pressure, and the stone shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap. "Rebecca, be careful," Michael warned, stepping back. "This building is old and unstable." Using a small pocket knife from her bag, Rebecca worked at the gap, levering the stone upward until it lifted free. Beneath it was not dirt or foundation, but darkness, a small, perfectly square opening that appeared to lead downward. "Get me a flashlight," she said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Michael reluctantly handed her a small flashlight from his key ring. Rebecca aimed the beam into the opening, revealing a narrow stone shaft extending downward about 3 feet before opening into what appeared to be a larger space. "There's a chamber under here," she breathed. "A hidden room beneath the barn." "This is a bad idea," Michael said, but Rebecca was already working to remove adjacent stones, widening the opening. Her academic curiosity had overtaken caution. "Help me move these," she insisted. When Michael hesitated, she added, "James might have found this. This might be what he was investigating when he died." That possibility seemed to sway him. Together, they managed to clear a space large enough for a person to slip through. Rebecca lay on her stomach, shining the light into the revealed chamber. Below was a space roughly 8 feet square, with walls of carefully fitted stone. The air that wafted up smelled ancient and undisturbed. "I'm going down there," Rebecca announced, already maneuvering her legs into the opening. "Absolutely not," Michael protested. "We don't know if it's stable. There could be dangerous gases. Snakes. I've explored cenotes in the Yucatan and caves in Guatemala," Rebecca cut him off. "I know what I'm doing. Just make sure you can pull me out if needed." before he could object further, Rebecca lowered herself into the opening, using the rough stones as handholds until her feet touched the solid floor below. The chamber was larger than it had first appeared, with a ceiling just high enough for her to stand upright. The flashlight's beam revealed walls covered in faint pictographs and symbols, some recognizably Cherokee, others unfamiliar to her despite her archaeological background. "Michael," she called up, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "This is incredible. There are symbols down here, ancient writing. This isn't just a root cellar or storage space, it's some kind of ceremonial chamber." Michael's worried face appeared in the opening above. "What do you see?" "Pictographs, dozens of them." And Rebecca's light had fallen on something in the center of the chamber. A stone pedestal, roughly waist-high, with a rectangular depression in its top. Within the depression lay what appeared to be a bundle wrapped in deteriorating animal hide. "There's an artifact here," she said, her professional training taking over as she approached slowly, careful not to disturb anything. "Some kind of bundle on a stone altar." "Don't touch anything," Michael warned. "If this is Native American, there could be serious legal implications." Rebecca knew he was right. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act had strict provisions about indigenous artifacts and remains. As an anthropologist, she was intimately familiar with the protocols. "I'm just looking," she assured him, though the temptation to unwrap the bundle was almost overwhelming. She carefully circled the pedestal, documenting everything with her phone's camera. The bundle appeared to be wrapped in deer hide, bound with what looked like sinew. At one end, something hard and flat protruded slightly from the wrapping, something that reflected the flashlight's beam with a metallic gleam. "I think there's metal in this bundle," she called up to Michael, "possibly copper or gold." The Cherokee were known for their metalwork, but this looks different. Rebecca continued her careful documentation, noting how the pictographs on the fire walls seemed to tell a story, flowing in sequences around the chamber. Many depicted celestial events, stars, comets, what appeared to be solar eclipses. Others showed human figures in various poses of ceremony. But what caught her attention most were the repeated images of ships' vessels that appeared European in design, yet were depicted in a style consistent with indigenous artwork. "Michael, these images show European ships, but in a way that suggests the artist had seen them firsthand. And from the style and deterioration, these are very old, possibly pre-colonial." "That doesn't make sense," Michael's voice came from above. "The Cherokee didn't have contact with Europeans until much later." "Exactly," Rebecca replied, excitement building in her voice. "Which means either these aren't Cherokee, or our understanding of first contact is wrong." A sudden sound from outside the barn, a car door slamming, interrupted their discovery. Michael's head disappeared from the opening. "Someone's here," he called down a moment later. A tribal police vehicle. Rebecca's heart sank. Someone must have reported their presence, and now they'd have to explain why they were excavating what might be a protected site. Her academic career could be in jeopardy if this was handled poorly. "I'm coming up," she said, reluctantly turning away from the chamber. "Help me out." With Michael's assistance, Rebecca climbed back into the barn just as footsteps approached the door. She quickly brushed the dust from her clothes as a tall man in a tribal police uniform entered, accompanied by an elderly woman in traditional Cherokee dress. "Professor Blackwood?" the officer asked, his expression neutral but his tone sharp. "I'm Officer Daniel Running Wolf with the Cherokee Nation Tribal Police. We received a report of potential disturbance at a suspected cultural site." Rebecca stepped forward, trying to appear calm despite the dirt on her knees and the obvious opening in the floor behind her. "Officer, I'm Rebecca Blackwood. This is my property. I inherited it from my late husband. We discovered what appears to be a ceremonial chamber beneath the barn. I was conducting a preliminary assessment before contacting proper authorities. The elderly woman stepped forward, her dark eyes fixed not on Rebecca, but on the opening in the floor. I am Margaret Mankiller, Cultural Preservation Officer for the Cherokee Nation. May I? She gestured toward the opening. Rebecca nodded, stepping aside. Of course. Margaret approached the opening, knelt with surprising agility for her age, and peered down into the chamber. She remained silent for a long moment, then spoke softly in Cherokee. Finally, she turned to Officer Running Wolf. "It is as the dreams foretold," she said simply. "The vessel of truth has been found." The officer's professional demeanor faltered for a moment, revealing surprise. "You're certain?" Margaret nodded. "Call the council. Tell them the time of revealing has begun." Rebecca exchanged confused glances with Michael. "I'm sorry, but what is the vessel of truth? And how did you know there was something to find here?" Margaret turned to Rebecca, studying her with penetrating intensity. "Your husband never told you why he purchased this land. He said it had historical value, that it was connected to both Cherokee and settler history. But he never mentioned anything about a hidden chamber." A sad smile crossed Margaret's weathered face. "James Blackwood came to us 3 years ago, seeking permission to search for the chamber. He had discovered references to it in his own family records. His great-great-grandmother was Cherokee, married to the man who built this barn." Rebecca stared at her in shock. "James never told me he had Cherokee ancestry." "Perhaps he was waiting until he had proof," Margaret suggested. "Many families have lost their connections through generations of suppression. He wanted to reclaim his heritage by finding the chamber and protecting it." Officer Running Wolf spoke into his radio, his voice low and urgent. When he finished, he addressed Rebecca formally. "Professor Blackwood, this site is now under the protection of the Cherokee Nation pending full archaeological assessment. I'll need to secure the area. Am I in trouble?" Rebecca asked directly. "I had no intention of disturbing a sacred site." "That will depend on the council's determination," he replied. "But if Margaret believes you found this chamber by legitimate means, that will carry significant weight." Margaret had moved to examine the pictographs visible from the opening. "These tell the story of the first witnesses," she said, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "Those who saw the pale ones arrived before the history's record." "First witnesses?" Rebecca's academic interest was fully engaged now. "Are you suggesting there was contact between Cherokee people and Europeans earlier than the historical record indicates?" "Not just contact," Margaret replied, looking up at Rebecca with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. "The bundle you found contains proof that will change how America understands its own beginning. The true story of this land has been buried, just like this chamber." Before Rebecca could ask more questions, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching interrupted them. Officer Running Wolf moved to the barn door. "The tribal council members are arriving." And he paused, peering outside. "There's a vehicle from the State Historical Society as well." Rebecca felt suddenly overwhelmed. What had begun as a reluctant visit to her late husband's failing ranch had exploded into something she couldn't have imagined. A hidden chamber, ancient artifacts, and now officials descending on the property. And somewhere in this whirlwind of events was James, his undisclosed heritage, his secret quest, and perhaps even the true circumstances of his death. As tribal elders in formal attire began entering the barn, followed by state officials carrying documentation equipment, Rebecca stepped back, trying to process the rapid change in her circumstances. Michael moved to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "This is bigger than a property dispute now," he whispered. "Whatever's in that chamber could have serious legal and historical implications." Rebecca nodded, watching as Margaret conferred with the newly arrived elders, pointing toward the opening in the floor. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to awe as they peered into the chamber below. An older man in expensive suit approached Rebecca, extending his hand. "Professor Blackwood, I'm Dr. William Thornton, Director of the Oklahoma Historical Society. Word of your discovery has reached us with remarkable speed." Rebecca shook his hand, noting the eager gleam in his eyes. "Things have moved very quickly, Dr. Thornton. I'm still trying to understand what I've found. If the preliminary reports are accurate, you may have discovered evidence that will fundamentally alter our understanding of pre-colonial contact in North America," he said, lowering his voice. "The academic implications alone are staggering. And the legal implications?" Rebecca asked pointedly. Dr. Thornton's expression became more measured. "Complex, to say the least. This land sits at the intersection of private property rights, tribal sovereignty, and historical preservation laws. Not to mention the potential international interest if this truly involves early European contact." One of the tribal elders, a distinguished man with silver hair pulled back in a traditional style, approached them. "I am Thomas Hummingbird, chief of the Cherokee Nation Eastern Band. Margaret tells me you are the widow of James Blackwood?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, I inherited this property after his death 8 months ago." Chief Hummingbird studied her face. "James came to us seeking his heritage. He believed his ancestor, Sarah Nighthawk, had been entrusted with protecting knowledge that could change history. We thought his quest was based on family legends, but it seems he was right. Why didn't he tell me any of this?" Rebecca asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "He was sworn to secrecy until the chamber was found and verified by tribal authorities," the chief explained. "Our histories speak of a sacred trust, knowledge protected until the world was ready to receive it. According to our traditions, only when the rightful guardian discovers the chamber can the truth be revealed." Rebecca felt a chill run through her. "And you believe I'm this guardian now?" "The chamber remained hidden for nearly 2 centuries, yet revealed itself to you within months of taking possession of this land. Our elders would consider that significant." Dr. Thornton interjected. "Chief Hummingbird, with all due respect, we need to establish proper scientific protocols for examining the chamber and its contents. The historical significance will be determined according to Cherokee Nation procedures first." The chief replied firmly. "This is a sacred site on land that has complex jurisdictional status." As the men continued their discussion, Rebecca noticed Margaret Mankiller beckoning to her from beside the opening to the chamber. She excused herself and approached the elderly woman. "They will argue jurisdiction and protocols for hours," Margaret said quietly. "But you should see what your husband died trying to protect. Come." Without waiting for the officials to notice, Margaret lowered herself into the chamber with surprising agility. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before following her down. The chamber seemed different, now more alive somehow, as if Margaret's presence had awakened something in the ancient space. Margaret moved directly to the stone pedestal and the hide-wrapped bundle. "This is the vessel of truth," she said, her voice reverent. "Our oral histories speak of European ships that arrived on our shores long before Columbus, of pale visitors who came not as conquerors but as refugees, fleeing persecution in their homeland. That would fundamentally contradict accepted history," Rebecca said, her academic mind racing with implications. "History is written by those who control the narrative," Margaret replied simply. "This bundle contains proof metal artifacts with markings that cannot be explained by conventional history. And something more valuable, still a written record. In a hybrid language, part Cherokee syllabary, part Norse runes." "Norse?" Rebecca gasped. "You're suggesting Viking contact with Cherokee people. Not Vikings as warriors, but as families seeking new homes after their initial settlements in the north failed. The story has been preserved in our oral traditions, but dismissed by academics as legend." Margaret's hand hovered over the bundle, without touching it, until now. The sound of voices above grew louder as officials noticed their absence. Margaret spoke quickly. Your husband discovered the truth in old family papers that his ancestor Sarah Nighthawk had married the son of a Norse refugee. Their descendants built this barn over the chamber to protect the evidence until the time was right for the truth to emerge. And that time is now? Rebecca asked. The prophecy states that when the world becomes too fractured by false histories, the truth must be revealed to heal the divisions. Margaret looked directly into Rebecca's eyes. Your husband died because someone didn't want this truth revealed. His heart attack was not natural. Rebecca felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her. What are you saying? There are powerful interests who prefer the conventional narrative of America's discovery. James was getting too close to the truth. But his death brought, you hear, an anthropologist with the credentials to make the world listen, and the bloodline connection through marriage to be recognized as a legitimate guardian. Before Rebecca could respond, Officer Runningwolf's face appeared at the opening. Above, Margaret, the council requests your presence. And Professor Blackwood, there are officials here from the Smithsonian Institution who are very interested in speaking with you. Margaret gave Rebecca a meaningful look. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone seeks truth for noble purposes. As they climbed back into the barn, Rebecca found it transformed into an impromptu command center. Additional tribal police had established a perimeter around the property. Officials in suits conferred in corners. Equipment was being unloaded from vans bearing logos of various institutions. A distinguished woman in her 60s approached Rebecca, extending her hand. Professor Blackwood, I'm Dr. Eleanor Hayes, Director of Indigenous Studies at the Smithsonian. News of your discovery has reached Washington with remarkable speed. Rebecca shook her hand, feeling suddenly out of her depth. This has all happened very quickly, Dr. Hayes. Such discoveries often do, Hayes replied with a tight smile. I'd like to discuss establishing a joint research protocol that respects both academic rigor and cultural sensitivity. As Dr. Hayes continued outlining a proposed research framework, Rebecca noticed Michael signaling to her urgently from near the barn door. Excusing herself, she joined him outside. Rebecca, you need to be careful, he said in a low voice. I've been making calls. The Historical Society, the Smithsonian, they arrived too quickly. Someone was monitoring this property. James's death, Rebecca whispered. Margaret suggested it wasn't natural. Michael's expression confirmed her fears. The medical examiner's report noted anomalies, but not enough to rule out natural causes. I didn't want to distress you at the time. Rebecca felt her world shifting beneath her feet. The failing ranch she'd reluctantly inherited. The husband whose secrets she was only beginning to understand, and now a discovery that potentially rewrote American history, all connected in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. What do I do now? She asked, more to herself than to Michael. You become what James believed you could be, came Margaret's voice from behind them. The elderly woman had approached silently, the guardian of truth in a time of necessary revelation. As the Oklahoma sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch that had seemed like such a burden just hours ago, Rebecca Blackwood faced a choice. She could step aside, let institutions claim the discovery and control the narrative. Or she could honor her husband's quest and embrace a role she never sought, protector of a truth that could change how America understood its own beginnings. Inside the barn, officials continued their jurisdictional debates. Outside, Rebecca made her decision, drawing strength from the connection to this land that she now understood had been waiting for her, a failing ranch that contained not just her husband's final legacy, but perhaps America's hidden origin story. The chamber beneath the stone barn had remained sealed for generations, its secrets preserved by those who understood that timing was everything. Now, as Rebecca Blackwood stood at the threshold of discovery, she recognized that some inheritances came with responsibilities greater than mere property. The widow who had reluctantly taken possession of a failing ranch now found herself the custodian of a truth that had waited centuries to be told. "I'll need your help," she said finally to Margaret and Michael, "both of you. To do this right too. Honor James and the truth he died protecting." As darkness fell over Cherokee County, Oklahoma, Rebecca Blackwood stepped into a role she never anticipated, but for which her entire life, her academic training, her marriage to James, even her grief had prepared her. The failing ranch that had seemed like a burden had revealed itself as the gateway to her true purpose. A purpose that powerful forces would soon conspire to prevent, as the implications of what lay beneath the stone barn began to ripple outward, threatening foundations more significant than mere buildings. The days following Rebecca Blackwood's discovery unfolded with dizzying speed. The once quiet ranch transformed into a secure archaeological site, with tribal police maintaining a perimeter, while teams of specialists arrived from across the country. By sunrise, a climate-controlled tent had been erected over the chamber entrance, and researchers in protective gear moved carefully below, documenting every aspect of the ancient space before anything was disturbed. Rebecca found herself at the center of competing interests, each claiming authority over her discovery. The Smithsonian team, led by Dr. Eleanor Hayes, emphasized scientific protocols and academic rigor. The Cherokee Nation officials, guided by Elder Margaret Mankiller, insisted on spiritual considerations and tribal sovereignty. State historical authorities worried about jurisdiction and proper procedures. Through it all, Rebecca maintained one unwavering position: nothing would leave the site without joint approval from all parties involved. "Your husband would be proud," Michael told her as they watched the careful excavation from a monitoring station set up in the ranch house. "You've managed to get 3 agencies that normally fight like cats and dogs to actually cooperate." Rebecca sipped her coffee, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept more than a few hours since the discovery 3 days ago. "I'm not sure cooperate is the right word. Reluctantly coexist might be more accurate." On the monitors, they could see the archaeological team gently cleaning the pictographs on the chamber walls, revealing more of the ancient imagery with each passing hour. The most fascinating discoveries were the depictions of what appeared to be European longships alongside traditional Cherokee symbols, visual evidence supporting Margaret's extraordinary claim about pre-Columbian contact. "The radiocarbon dating results should be back tomorrow," Rebecca noted, reviewing her notes. "That will tell us when the chamber was sealed." Michael leaned closer to one of the screens. "Is that Dr. Hayes? What's she doing?" Rebecca looked up sharply. The Smithsonian director had entered the chamber without the tribal representative, who was supposed to accompany all research teams. More concerning, she appeared to be examining the hide-wrapped bundle on the stone pedestal, the one item everyone had agreed would not be touched until all parties approved a handling protocol. "She shouldn't be down there alone," Rebecca said, reaching for the radio. Before she could call the security team, the door to the ranch house burst open, and Margaret Mankiller entered, her normally composed face tight with anger. "Your Smithsonian colleague is violating our agreement," she said without preamble. "She must be removed immediately." Rebecca was already heading for the door. "I'm going down there now." "Be careful," Michael called after her. "Hayes has powerful connections in Washington." The morning air was cool as Rebecca crossed the yard to the excavation tent. Inside, she found controlled chaos. Tribal representatives were arguing with Smithsonian staff, while state officials tried unsuccessfully to mediate. Through the opening to the chamber, Rebecca could see Dr. Hayes still examining the bundle, now wearing gloves and using specialized tools to probe its wrappings. "Dr. Hayes," Rebecca called down firmly, "please step away from the artifact. We have protocols in place." Hayes looked up, her expression unreadable behind her protective mask. "Professor Blackwood, as you can see, I'm taking all necessary preservation measures." This bundle contains metal components that are actively degrading. Intervention is required immediately. That decision isn't yours alone to make, Rebecca replied, beginning the descent into the chamber. We agreed that the bundle would remain untouched until all parties approved a handling protocol. As Rebecca reached the chamber floor, she noticed something alarming. A small corner of the hide wrapping had been folded back, revealing a glimpse of what lay within a metallic surface inscribed with unfamiliar symbols. Neither Cherokee nor typical Norse runes, but something that combined elements of both. You've opened it, Rebecca said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. A minimal examination to assess deterioration, Hayes countered smoothly. The conservation needs are urgent. Chief Hummingbird appeared at the chamber opening above. Dr. Hayes, your actions violate both our agreement and federal law. Please exit the chamber immediately. Hayes straightened, removing her gloves with deliberate slowness. The Smithsonian Institution has a congressional mandate to preserve artifacts of historical significance. This site contains evidence that could fundamentally alter our understanding of American history, which is precisely why proper protocols must be followed, Rebecca interjected. This isn't just about historical artifacts. These are culturally significant items to the Cherokee people, and potentially to Norse descendants as well, if the preliminary assessments are correct, Hayes added, her tone slightly conciliatory. Which is why a comprehensive approach is needed. As Hayes climbed out of the chamber, Rebecca remained below, examining what had been revealed. The metal was unlike anything she'd expected, not crude or primitive, but finely worked with precise engravings. Even more surprising was its condition. Despite centuries underground, there was minimal corrosion. Margaret, Rebecca called up. Could you join me, please? The elderly Cherokee woman descended carefully into the chamber. When she saw the partially exposed artifact, she inhaled sharply. They have begun the awakening without proper ceremony. What do you mean? Rebecca asked. Margaret knelt beside the pedestal, her weathered fingers hovering just above the exposed metal. Our stories tell that the truth vessel contains not just objects, but knowledge protected by both physical and spiritual means. The awakening requires specific protocols to ensure the knowledge is received correctly. Rebecca had spent her academic career balancing scientific methodology with respect for indigenous knowledge systems. What ceremony is needed? One that combines the traditions of both peoples represented here, Cherokee and Norse. The guardians who sealed this chamber were of mixed heritage, as was your husband. As are you, through your marriage. Rebecca's scientific mind wanted to dismiss this as superstition, but her years of fieldwork had taught her that indigenous knowledge often contained practical wisdom clothed in spiritual language. Will you guide me through what needs to be done? Margaret studied her for a long moment. You accept this responsibility? I do, Rebecca replied, surprising herself with her certainty. Then we begin tonight, when the stars align as they did when the chamber was sealed. Margaret rose with dignity. Until then, nothing more should be disturbed. As they climbed out of the chamber, they found the situation above had deteriorated. Dr. Hayes was on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone with apparent authority. Chief Hummingbird was consulting with tribal attorneys. State officials were documenting everything, clearly expecting legal challenges. Dr. Thornton from the Oklahoma Historical Society approached Rebecca as she emerged. Professor Blackwood, this situation is becoming untenable. The state governor has been contacted, and there's talk of federal intervention. On what grounds? Rebecca asked. National historical significance. There are mechanisms for the federal government to assume control of sites deemed critically important to American heritage. Rebecca felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. This was what Margaret had warned about: powerful interests moving to control the narrative. Perhaps the same interests that might have been involved in James's death. The land is private property, she stated firmly. And the artifacts fall under NAGPRA jurisdiction due to their clear indigenous connection. It's more complicated than that, Thornton replied. The potential Norse connection creates overlapping jurisdictions. This could take years to resolve in courts. Rebecca glanced at the sun's position. Less than 12 hours until Margaret's ceremony. She needed to buy time. I'm willing to consider a joint stewardship agreement, she announced loudly enough for all the arguing parties to hear. A formal document that acknowledges the interests of all stakeholders while establishing shared oversight. Her words created a momentary pause in the conflicts. Dr. Hayes ended her call, looking thoughtful. Chief Hummingbird nodded slightly in approval. That could work, Dr. Thornton said cautiously. But drafting such an agreement would take time. Then we should begin immediately, Rebecca suggested. My ranch house has plenty of room. We can work through the night if necessary. The suggestion of immediate action appeased the various factions. As the officials gathered their materials and began moving toward the house, Michael pulled Rebecca aside. Clever distraction, he murmured. But what's your real plan? Margaret needs until nightfall for a ceremony she believes is necessary, Rebecca whispered. I'm buying time. Michael's expression grew concerned. Rebecca, I'm all for respecting cultural traditions, but there are serious legal implications. Here, your position is already precarious. This goes beyond legal considerations, Michael. James died protecting this chamber and its contents. I owe it to him to ensure it's handled properly. The negotiation session in the ranch house stretched through the afternoon and into early evening. Rebecca, drawing on skills honed in academic committee meetings, kept the discussions focused on procedural details that everyone could debate endlessly without reaching the core issues of who would ultimately control the artifacts. As darkness fell, she excused herself briefly, ostensibly to prepare refreshments. In the kitchen, she found Margaret waiting, a small bundle of ceremonial items laid out on the table. It is time, the elder said simply. The others are distracted with their papers and arguments. We must go to the chamber now. There are guards, Rebecca pointed out. They will not see us, Margaret replied with quiet confidence. The guardians of old have awakened to protect their secret once more. Rebecca might have dismissed such a claim days ago, but too many inexplicable things had happened since she discovered the chamber. She nodded and followed Margaret through the back door. Remarkably, they encountered no resistance as they crossed the property. The security personnel seemed distracted, looking elsewhere or suddenly called away by radio communications. The excavation tent stood silent, its equipment powered down for the night. How is this possible? Rebecca whispered as they entered unimpeded. The land remembers its protectors, Margaret replied. And you are connected to this place through more than just legal ownership. They descended into the chamber, which now appeared different in the beam of their flashlights. The pictograph seemed to shimmer slightly, as if newly painted rather than centuries old. Margaret began arranging small items around the perimeter herbs, carved stones, and other ceremonial objects. She instructed Rebecca to sit opposite her, with the stone pedestal between them. The ceremony requires representatives of both bloodlines, Margaret explained. I carry Cherokee blood. Through your marriage to James, you are connected to both Cherokee and Norse lineages. But I have no biological connection, Rebecca objected. The old ones recognized bonds of the heart as equal to bonds of blood, Margaret replied. Your love for James and your commitment to protecting this truth qualifies you as guardian. The ceremony began with Margaret chanting softly in Cherokee, then switching to phrases in what Rebecca recognized as an archaic form of Norse. The air in the chamber grew warmer, and Rebecca found herself feeling lightheaded, almost as if the oxygen was being replaced by something else. Now, Margaret said, reaching for the hide-wrapped bundle, we awaken the vessel of truth. Together, they carefully unwrapped the ancient covering, revealing what lay within. Rebecca gasped as the complete artifact became visible, a rectangular metal tablet approximately 12 inches long and 8 inches wide, covered in precisely engraved symbols. Alongside it lay smaller objects, a pendant bearing combined Cherokee and Norse symbols, a small knife with an unusually shaped handle, and most surprisingly, what appeared to be a sealed clay container. "The witness record," Margaret said reverently, pointing to the metal tablet. "Written in the combined language of both peoples, it tells the true story of the first Norse families who came to these lands centuries before Columbus." The metal gleamed in the flashlight's beam, showing no signs of the corrosion one would expect after centuries underground. The symbols appeared freshly carved, their edges sharp and defined. "How is this possible?" Rebecca whispered, her academic mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. "This metal should have degraded. The chamber was built on a convergence of earth energies," Margaret explained. "What modern science might call a geomagnetic anomaly. It preserves what is placed within it." Rebecca reached out tentatively, her fingertips hovering just above the tablet's surface. "May I?" Margaret nodded. "You are guardian now. It is your right." As Rebecca's fingers made contact with the metal, an unexpected sensation raced through her body, a tingling warmth that spread from her fingertips up her arm and throughout her entire body. The symbols on the tablet seemed to shift slightly, as if adjusting to her touch. "What's happening?" she gasped, unable to pull her hand away despite her alarm. "The vessel recognizes its new guardian," Margaret said calmly. "It is sharing its knowledge with you." Images flooded Rebecca's mind, vivid, detailed visions that felt more like memories than imagination. She saw Norse ships arriving on unfamiliar shores, families disembarking, fearful first encounters with indigenous people that gradually transformed into cautious cooperation. She witnessed ceremonies that combined elements of both cultures, marriages that created new bloodlines, and finally, the deliberate decision to hide evidence of their presence as new waves of less peaceful Europeans began to arrive. When the visions faded, Rebecca found herself gasping for breath, her hand still resting on the tablet. "I saw them," she whispered. "The Norse families who came here, their integration with the Cherokee people, the decision to hide their presence." "The vessel has shared its primary knowledge," Margaret confirmed. "There's more contained within. But this first awakening establishes your connection as guardian." Rebecca's academic mind raced with implications. "This changes everything we thought we knew about American history. The first European presence wasn't about conquest but cooperation. There was cultural exchange, intermarriage, a blending of traditions, and a deliberate choice to keep this truth hidden when it became clear that later European arrivals had different intentions," Margaret added. "The guardians of this knowledge, both Cherokee and Norse descendants, recognized that the time wasn't right for the truth to be known." "And now it is?" Rebecca asked. "The signs indicate so. The chamber revealing itself to you, the vessel responding to your touch, these are confirmations." Margaret began carefully rewrapping the artifacts, "But we must proceed wisely. There are those who will resist this truth because it challenges the narratives that justify their power." A sudden noise from above interrupted them, voices approaching the excavation tent. Their absence from the negotiations had finally been noticed. "We need to go," Rebecca said urgently, helping Margaret secure the artifacts. "Not yet," Margaret replied calmly. "First, you must accept the guardian's oath, as James did before you." Despite the growing sounds of approaching security personnel, Rebecca nodded. Margaret took her hands and spoke formal words in Cherokee, then in the archaic Norse language, finally switching to English. "Do you, Rebecca Blackwood, accept the responsibility of guardian, pledging to protect the truth contained in the vessel, to share it when the world is ready to receive it, and to ensure it serves healing rather than division?" The words resonated in a way Rebecca couldn't explain, as if they connected to something deeper than conscious thought. "I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Then the guardianship is transferred," Margaret declared. "The knowledge of the first witnesses is in your keeping." As the words were spoken, the chamber seemed to shift slightly, the pictographs on the walls glowing faintly for a brief moment, before returning to normal. Rebecca felt a subtle change within herself, a new certainty, a connection to something ancient and powerful. Security personnel appeared at the chamber opening above, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Professor Blackwood, Elder Mankiller, you're not authorized to be here without supervision." Rebecca stood, helping Margaret to her feet. "We were conducting a necessary cultural ceremony, as is our right under NAGPRA and the American Indian Religious Freedom Act." Her confident tone gave the security officers pause. As they climbed out of the chamber, Rebecca was surprised to see Dr. Hayes waiting, her expression a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "What exactly were you doing?" "Down there?" Hayes demanded. "Fulfilling obligations that predate your institution by centuries," Margaret replied simply. Rebecca addressed the Smithsonian director directly. "Dr. Hayes, I understand your scientific interest in these artifacts, but there are protocols beyond those in your manuals that must be respected. This site represents a confluence of two cultural traditions, both of which have ceremonial requirements for handling sacred objects." Hayes studied Rebecca with new interest. "You've changed, Professor Blackwood. Yesterday, you were a reluctant inheritor of a failing ranch. Today you speak with the authority of someone with deep cultural investment in these artifacts." "Perhaps I've remembered something important that my academic training encouraged me to forget," Rebecca replied. "That knowledge exists in many forms, and dismissing what we don't understand doesn't make us better scientists, it makes us poorer ones." As they walked back toward the ranch house, where the negotiation teams were still gathered, Rebecca felt a new clarity of purpose. The visions from the tablet had shown her a history very different from the one she'd taught in her university courses, a history of cooperation rather than conquest, of cultural exchange rather than domination. A narrative that could change how Americans understood their origins and perhaps how they saw their future. But Margaret's warnings echoed in her mind. There were powerful interests invested in maintaining the conventional narrative. James may have died protecting this truth. Now the responsibility had passed to her. At the ranch house, the various officials looked up as they entered, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Rebecca took advantage of the momentary silence to make an announcement. "I've reached a decision about how we'll proceed," she said firmly. "As the legal owner of this property and as the designated guardian of the artifacts according to Cherokee tradition, I am establishing the Blackwood Nighthawk Historical Trust, named in honor of my husband's Cherokee ancestor." The declaration was met with surprised murmurs. Rebecca continued before anyone could interrupt. "This trust will have a governing board that includes representatives from the Cherokee Nation, academic institutions, and governmental agencies. All research on the artifacts will be conducted on-site, under protocols that respect both scientific standards and indigenous traditions." Dr. Hayes stepped forward. "Professor Blackwood, while your intentions may be admirable, you don't have the authority to—" "Actually, she does," interrupted Michael, who had been quietly consulting legal references during the evening. "Under a combination of private property law, NAGPRA provisions, and precedents established in similar cases, Professor Blackwood's approach offers the most legally defensible framework for proceeding." Chief Hummingbird nodded slowly. "The Cherokee Nation would find such an arrangement acceptable, provided our cultural protocols are given equal weight to academic considerations." Dr. Thornton from the State Historical Society looked thoughtful. "A trust structure could work, especially if it includes proper conservation guarantees and public education components." Only Dr. Hayes seemed resistant, but even she appeared to recognize the shift in consensus in the room. The Smithsonian would require certain assurances about research access and methodological standards, which would be negotiated in good faith, Rebecca assured her. The goal isn't to restrict knowledge, but to ensure it's approached with appropriate respect and shared in a way that promotes understanding rather than academic competition. As the officials began discussing the practical implications of her proposal, Rebecca stepped away briefly, finding a moment of quiet on the ranch house porch. The night sky above Oklahoma stretched endlessly, stars shimmering in patterns that had guided both Cherokee and Norse ancestors. Margaret joined her, the elder's presence comforting in its quiet strength. "You've taken the first step as guardian," she observed, "establishing protection for the physical artifacts." Rebecca nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "The visions I saw, they showed a different America than the one in our history books. One where first contact didn't have to mean conquest and displacement." "That truth has power," Margaret said. "It challenges the foundation myths that justified centuries of taking land and destroying cultures. Some will resist it fiercely, like those who might have been involved in James's death." Rebecca asked quietly. Margaret's expression grew solemn. "There are organizations dedicated to maintaining certain historical narratives. Your husband discovered references to one such group in his research, the Colonial Heritage Foundation. They present themselves as historical preservationists, but their true purpose is protecting the conventional story of America's discovery and founding." The name triggered a memory from the negotiations. "Dr. Hayes mentioned them," said they. "Might be interested in funding portions of the research." "They would be," Margaret replied grimly, "to control what's found and what's reported." Rebecca gazed out at her ranch, no longer a burden but a responsibility. The failing property that had seemed like James's foolish final investment now revealed itself as something far more significant. The sight of a historical truth so powerful that people might kill to keep it hidden. "What happens now?" she asked. "The path of a guardian is never straight or easy," Margaret said. "But you won't walk it alone. There are others who have protected pieces of this truth throughout the generations. They will find you." As if to confirm her words, a vehicle's headlights appeared on the distant road leading to the ranch. An unmarked black SUV approached. Slowly, stopping at the security checkpoint at the property entrance. Who could that be at this hour? Rebecca wondered aloud. Margaret smiled mysteriously. "The awakening of the vessel sends ripples through time. The network of guardians is responding." As Rebecca watched, the security team checked credentials and waved the vehicle through. It proceeded up the long driveway, coming to a stop near the ranch house. A tall man with silver hair emerged, his bearing suggesting military background despite his civilian clothes. "Professor Blackwood," he called, approaching the porch. "My name is Eric Thorson. I believe we have matters of mutual interest to discuss." "Regarding what, exactly?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "Regarding the true history of European indigenous relations in pre-Columbian America," he replied. "And regarding my ancestors who arrived on these shores in longships nearly 500 years before Columbus." Rebecca exchanged glances with Margaret, whose slight nod confirmed what Rebecca already suspected. The Guardian Network was indeed mobilizing, drawn to the awakening of the vessel of truth. The failing ranch that had seemed like such a burden just days ago now stood at the center of a gathering storm, one that could potentially rewrite American history and challenge the founding narratives of a nation. And Rebecca Blackwood, reluctant inheritor turned guardian, found herself at the heart of it all. Her grief for her husband now transformed into determination to protect the truth he had died to preserve. Eric Thorson stood in Rebecca's living room, his powerful presence commanding attention despite his quiet demeanor. The silver-haired man examined the photographs of the metal tablet with an expert's eye, occasionally nodding as if confirming something he already knew. 3 days had passed since his arrival, and the dynamics at the ranch had shifted dramatically with his presence. These inscriptions combine Elder Futhark runes with pre-syllabary Cherokee symbolic writing. He explained, pointing to specific markings, a hybrid communication system developed by two peoples who found themselves unexpected allies in a strange land. Rebecca studied the man who claimed direct descent from Norse settlers who had arrived in North America centuries before. Columbus. His credentials were impeccable, Professor Emeritus of Nordic Studies at Uppsala University, published author on Viking expansion, and consultant to museums worldwide. Yet it was his family connection that proved most valuable. He possessed private journals and artifacts passed down through generations that corroborated the chamber's evidence. How many people know about this history? Rebecca asked, pouring coffee for their morning briefing. The ranch kitchen had become their unofficial headquarters, away from the team still documenting the chamber. Very few with certainty, Thorson replied. Many indigenous tribes have oral traditions about pale visitors who came before the Spanish, but these were dismissed as myths incorporated after European contact. On the north side, some family histories mention Western settlements beyond Greenland, but without concrete evidence. Academia rejected these as family legends. Margaret Mankiller, who had become a permanent fixture at the ranch, added, "Our people have always known." The stories of the Shield brothers who came from the Eastern Sea were told to each generation. Shield brothers? Rebecca asked. Norse warriors who laid down their weapons to live in peace, Margaret explained. The name comes from how they eventually used their shields, not for war, but converted into tools for building and farming. The conversation paused as Michael entered, carrying documents from his most recent trip to the county archives. Since the discovery, he had devoted himself to researching local records, looking for any historical references that might support their findings. "You need to see this," he said, spreading papers on the table. "I found land records from 1843 when this property was first registered. The original owner is listed as Thomas Blackwood, but there's a notation referencing his marriage alliance with the Nighthawk family. It's the first documented connection between James's ancestors and this land." Rebecca examined the yellowed photocopies, feeling another piece of the puzzle fall into place. So James's research was right. His Cherokee ancestor, Sarah Nighthawk, married into the Blackwood family, who were stewards of this land and the chamber beneath it. Not just stewards, Thorson corrected. Based on these symbols, I believe the Blackwoods themselves were descendants of the original Norse settlers. The naming pattern follows Old Norse traditions, just adapted to English over generations. The revelation sent a chill through Rebecca. Her husband's connection to this place went deeper than she had imagined, not just through his Cherokee lineage, but potentially through Norse ancestry as well. He hadn't been researching his family history, he had been reclaiming it. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their discussion. Through the window, Rebecca saw two unmarked black SUVs pulling up to the security checkpoint. Unlike the official vehicles that had become common sights, these had no visible government markings. "Are we expecting more visitors?" she asked. Glancing at Michael, his expression darkened. "No, and our friends from the various agencies usually call ahead." Thorson moved to the window, his posture tensing as he observed the new arrivals. "I've seen vehicles like that before, in other contexts. Corporate security, usually for private research foundations." Margaret's eyes narrowed. The Colonial Heritage Foundation. Rebecca felt a surge of protective instinct. In the days since discovering the chamber, she had come to see herself not just as the inheritor of James's property, but as the guardian of a truth that could reshape understanding of American origins. This truth challenged powerful narratives that certain interests were invested in maintaining. "Michael, call Officer Running Wolf," she said decisively. "Tell him we have unauthorized visitors attempting to access a protected archaeological site." As Michael made the call, Rebecca watched the security team at the gate examining credentials. To her dismay, they seemed to be waving the vehicles through. "They're coming up," she said, a note of alarm in her voice. "Not unexpected," Thorson remarked grimly. "The awakening of the vessel sends ripples. Those who have suppressed this history would feel it stirring." Margaret moved with surprising speed for her age, gathering the photographs and documents spread across the table. "These must be secured. The vessel's physical form is protected in the chamber, but these copies could be confiscated." Rebecca led her to James's old office, where a hidden wall safe installed during one of his renovation projects provided temporary security for their most sensitive materials. As they secured the documents, Rebecca asked the question that had been forming in her mind since Thorson's arrival. "This isn't just about historical accuracy, is it? There's something more at stake here." Margaret's ancient eyes held centuries of wisdom as she replied. "The first contact between Norse and indigenous peoples established a template, one of cooperation, cultural exchange, and mutual respect. It demonstrated that European arrival didn't have to mean conquest and displacement. That truth challenges the foundations of how America justifies its origins. And some people don't want that challenge," Rebecca concluded. "Those who benefit from the conquest narrative will defend it fiercely," Margaret confirmed. "Your husband discovered this and paid the ultimate price." The sound of voices in the main room drew them back. Two men in expensive suits stood in the living room, flanked by security personnel who looked more military than corporate. Michael and Thorson faced them with carefully neutral expressions. Professor Blackwood, one of the men, greeted her, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm Jonathan Reynolds, Executive Director of the Colonial Heritage Foundation. This is my colleague, Dr. Philip Mercer, our head of research." Rebecca stepped forward, conscious of Margaret's steady presence. Behind her, "Mr. Reynolds, this is private property, and we're in the middle of a federally protected archaeological investigation. I don't recall approving your visit." Reynolds' smile remained fixed. "We have authorization from the State Historical Preservation Office to conduct an assessment. The historical significance of your discovery has raised concerns about proper preservation protocols." He presented documents that appeared official, though Rebecca noted they were signed by a deputy director she hadn't encountered in previous negotiations. "Our arrangement with the state office already addresses preservation concerns," she replied evenly. "The Blackwood Nighthawk Trust provides comprehensive oversight." "A trust that has not yet been legally established," Reynolds countered smoothly. "Until then, state and federal preservation statutes give us authority to evaluate sites of exceptional historical significance." Rebecca recognized the tactics at play, using bureaucratic mechanisms to gain access and control. Before she could respond, tribal police sirens sounded in the distance, approaching rapidly. "It seems we have a jurisdictional question to resolve," she said, allowing herself a small smile. "Officer Running Wolf of the Cherokee Nation Tribal Police can help clarify which authorities have standing here." Reynolds' composed expression faltered slightly. "Professor Blackwood, we're not here to create conflict. The Colonial Heritage Foundation simply wants to ensure that discoveries of this magnitude receive appropriate scientific attention." "Scientific attention without cultural context is precisely what we're avoiding," Rebecca replied firmly. "The artifacts discovered here represent a convergence of indigenous and Norse heritage. Both perspectives must be honored in any research approach." The arrival of Officer Running Wolf and two additional tribal police officers shifted the power dynamic in the room. The officer greeted Rebecca respectfully before addressing the visitors. "Gentlemen, this property is currently under joint protection by tribal authorities and federal agencies due to its cultural significance to the Cherokee Nation. Your state-level authorization does not supersede existing agreements." What followed was a tense but civil standoff, with Reynolds attempting various legal arguments while Officer Running Wolf firmly maintained the primacy of tribal interests in the archaeological site. Eventually, the Colonial Heritage Foundation representatives retreated, but not before Reynolds delivered a final message. Professor Blackwood, your discovery has implications far beyond this ranch. There are established frameworks for interpreting American history that have served our national identity for generations. Challenging those frameworks without proper scientific consensus could be seen as irresponsible, even damaging to our shared heritage. The threat beneath the diplomatic language was unmistakable. After they departed, Rebecca gathered her core. Team Michael, Margaret Thorson, and now Officer Running Wolf in the kitchen, away from potential surveillance. They'll be back, Running Wolf stated flatly. With stronger authorization or different tactics. The Colonial Heritage Foundation has connections throughout the government and academic sectors. Then we need to accelerate our plans, Rebecca decided. The trust needs to be legally established immediately, with proper protections for the artifacts and research protocols that can't be circumvented. Michael nodded. I've been working on the documents. With an emergency filing, we could have the basic structure in place by tomorrow. That addresses the legal protection, Thorson noted, but not the physical security. Reynolds strikes me as a man who pursues his objectives through multiple channels simultaneously. Rebecca thought of James, potentially murdered for discovering this truth, and felt a surge of determination. We need to create redundancy, ensure that even if they somehow gain control of the physical artifacts, the knowledge isn't lost. The traditional way was through memorization and oral tradition, Margaret offered. But in this modern age, we need a different approach. Rebecca's academic training suggested an answer. We document everything multiple copies, multiple formats, stored in multiple locations. And we begin sharing the findings through trusted academic channels immediately, establishing a public record that can't be easily suppressed. You're talking about bypassing the normal peer review process, Michael cautioned. Your academic reputation is worth risking for this, Rebecca finished firmly. James gave his life to protect this truth. I can risk my professional standing. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Michael filed the trust documents while Rebecca began the careful process of documentation. Each artifact from the chamber was photographed from multiple angles, the symbols transcribed and preliminary translations noted. Thorson's expertise proved invaluable, his knowledge of ancient Norse dialects helping to decipher the hybrid language of the inscriptions. By midday, they had compiled enough material for an initial academic paper one that would send shockwaves through multiple disciplines. Rebecca sat at James's desk, finalizing the document that would forever change her life and career. Are you certain about this? Michael asked, standing in the doorway. Once you submit this to your colleagues, there's no going back. The conventional historical establishment will attack both the findings and your credibility. Rebecca looked up from the computer, a new confidence in her expression. 3 weeks ago, I was a grieving widow facing financial ruin, reluctantly dealing with what I thought was James's foolish final investment. Now I understand he was reclaiming his heritage and protecting the truth that could heal deep wounds in our national psyche. She gestured to the paper taking shape on her screen. This evidence shows that the first sustained European presence in North America wasn't about conquest, but cooperation. That cultural exchange and mutual respect were possible. That's a truth worth fighting for, especially now when our nation is so divided by competing narratives about its identity and purpose. Michael studied his friend with newfound respect. The tentative, grief-stricken woman who had reluctantly visited the failing ranch just weeks ago had transformed into someone with profound purpose, a guardian, not just of artifacts but of a potential new understanding of American origins. The satellite phone on the desk rang, interrupting their conversation. This secure line had been installed by the tribal authorities for emergency communications. Rebecca answered to hear Chief Hummingbird's urgent voice. Professor Blackwood, our sources in Washington indicate that the Colonial Heritage Foundation has petitioned a federal judge for an emergency preservation order that would place the artifacts under government custody. They're claiming the tribal police lack proper resources to secure items of national historical significance. Rebecca's mind raced. How much time do we have? The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. If granted, federal marshals could arrive at your property by noon. After ending the call, Rebecca turned to Michael. We need to accelerate everything. The trust, the documentation, the academic release, all of it needs to happen today. What followed was a day of intense activity that transformed the failing ranch into a command center for what felt like a historical resistance movement. Trusted colleagues from Rebecca's university arrived to assist with documentation. Tribal representatives brought additional security. Thorson contacted fellow scholars in Europe who could corroborate aspects of the Norse connection. By sunset, the Blackwood Nighthawk Historical Trust was legally established, with Rebecca as primary trustee and a governing board that included Margaret Thorson, representatives from the Cherokee Nation, and respected academics from 3 universities. The first comprehensive paper documenting their findings had been submitted to the Journal of Archaeological Science, with copies sent to trusted colleagues at major universities worldwide. Most importantly, they had created what Margaret called knowledge redundancy, ensuring that no single raid or confiscation could suppress the truth they had uncovered. The physical artifacts remained important, but the knowledge they contained had now been dispersed too widely to be easily contained. As night fell over the Oklahoma ranch, Rebecca stood on the porch, watching the security teams make their rounds of the property. Stars shimmered overhead, the same stars that had guided Norse ships to these shores centuries before Columbus. Margaret joined her, the elder's quiet presence a source of strength. You've done well, Guardian. In one day, you've ensured that the truth can no longer be buried. But at what cost? Rebecca wondered aloud. Tomorrow, federal authorities may take custody of the artifacts. My academic reputation will be challenged once the paper circulates. And we still don't know the full extent of what we're facing with the Colonial Heritage Foundation. Every truth of great significance comes with great cost, Margaret replied. The question is never whether there will be sacrifice, but whether the truth is worth the sacrifice required. Rebecca thought of James, who had died protecting this knowledge, of the generations of guardians before him who had maintained the secret until the world was ready to receive it, of the original Norse and Cherokee people who had created a community based on cooperation rather than conquest, and then hidden that achievement when it became clear that new European arrivals followed a different path. It's worth it, she said with quiet certainty. This truth could help heal the wounds in our national story show that our origins didn't have to be rooted in displacement and violence, that another way was possible and actually happened. Margaret nodded approvingly. That is why you were chosen, Rebecca Blackwood. Not just because you inherited this land, but because you have the heart to understand why this truth matters, and the courage to stand for it when challenged. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Headlights appeared on the long driveway, but unlike the ominous arrival of the Colonial Heritage Foundation, this convoy was expected. Dr. Eleanor Hayes of the Smithsonian led a team of colleagues from various institutions, archaeologists, historians, and cultural preservation specialists who had been carefully vetted by Rebecca's team. Hayes approached the porch, her demeanor dramatically changed from their earlier confrontations. Professor Blackwood, thank you for the invitation. After reviewing the preliminary findings your team shared, I felt it necessary to reconsider my position. Rebecca welcomed the Smithsonian director, recognizing the significant shift this represented. Hayes had initially been skeptical, focused primarily on institutional interests. Now she seemed genuinely engaged with the historical implications. What changed your mind? Rebecca asked as they walked toward the barn where the chamber entrance was located. "Three things," Hayes replied candidly. "First, Professor Thorson's corroborating evidence from Norse family histories. Second, the linguistic analysis of the hybrid communication system, which cannot be easily dismissed. And third," she hesitated before continuing, "I received a warning from a colleague about the Colonial Heritage Foundation's true agenda. They're not just academic competitors, they actively suppress certain historical narratives." Inside the barn, the expanded research team gathered around the chamber. Entrance. Rebecca observed how the dynamics had evolved: tribal representatives working alongside academic researchers, Norse cultural experts consulting with Cherokee knowledge keepers. The failing ranch that had seemed like such a burden had become the center of a remarkable collaboration. Thorson approached with news from his European contacts. Universities in Norway, Iceland, and Denmark have confirmed they're receiving our materials. They're organizing their own press briefings to coincide with ours. This won't be dismissed as fringe research from a single source. The night progressed with careful planning for what would likely be a pivotal day in American historical understanding. Teams cataloged and cross-referenced every artifact, creating digital models that could be studied regardless of what happened to the physical items. Margaret and other tribal elders shared oral histories that provided context for the archaeological evidence. Thorson and his Nordic colleagues connected the findings to existing knowledge about Viking exploration. Near midnight, Rebecca retreated briefly to James's office, now her command center. On the desk sat a photograph she treasured. James standing proudly in front of the barn, shortly after purchasing the property. His eyes alight with purpose she hadn't understood at the time. Now she recognized it as the look of someone reconnecting with profound heritage. "You knew," she whispered to the image. "You knew what was hidden here, what it meant, why it mattered." The office door opened softly, and Michael entered with documents requiring her signature. He paused, noticing her moment of reflection. "He would be incredibly proud of you," Michael said gently. "Not just for finding what he sought, but for understanding why it matters." Rebecca signed the papers, legal documents that would help protect their discovery, regardless of what the morning might bring. "I never imagined inheriting a failing ranch would lead to this, challenging the foundation myths of American history. Continuing a guardianship that spans centuries, finding purpose beyond anything I could have envisioned." "Some inheritances are greater than property," Michael observed. "James left you something far more valuable than land." As she prepared for a few hours of rest before what promised to be a momentous day, Rebecca reflected on the transformation of the past weeks. The widow who had reluctantly visited a failing ranch, hoping only to sell it quickly and move on from grief, had discovered not just artifacts but purpose, becoming guardian of a truth with the power to reshape national understanding. The ranch that had seemed like a burden, draining her resources and prolonging her grief, had revealed itself as sacred ground, where a different American origin story had been preserved for centuries. Tomorrow would bring challenges, legal battles, academic criticism, perhaps even threats to her safety, but Rebecca Blackwood faced the coming dawn with the steady resolve of someone who had found her true calling. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought not of what might be lost in the coming confrontation, but of what had already been gained. A connection to something larger than herself, a purpose worthy of sacrifice, and the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable inheritances are those we never knew we needed. Dawn broke over the Oklahoma plains, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of amber and gold. Rebecca stood on her porch, watching the sunrise with a cup of steaming coffee warming her hands. The beauty of the moment stood in stark contrast to the tension building around her property. In the distance, she could see news vans gathering at the perimeter, held back by tribal police. Word had spread faster than anticipated. "It's going to be quite a day," Michael said, joining her with his own coffee. "Judge Wilson's hearing starts in 2 hours. Our legal team is already at the courthouse. Rebecca nodded, her resolve strengthening with the rising sun. Whatever happens in that courtroom, the truth is already free. It can't be locked away again. Last night's frantic work had ensured that multiple streams of information had been released. Simultaneously, academic papers submitted to peer-reviewed journals, digital archives shared with universities worldwide, and a carefully crafted press release sent to selected journalists known for their integrity. The Blackwood Nighthawk Trust's website had gone live at midnight, featuring initial findings and historical context, already recording over 50,000 visitors. The failing ranch that had seemed like such a burden now hummed with purposeful energy. Research teams prepared for a public demonstration of their findings, scheduled for noon, strategically timed to occur regardless of the court's decision. Cherokee elders had gathered in the pre-dawn hours for traditional ceremonies, blessing the site and the day ahead. European scholars participated via video conference, providing real-time analysis of the Norse connections. Professor Blackwood called Dr. Hayes, approaching from the barn with a tablet in hand. The initial carbon dating results had been confirmed by 3 separate labs. The chamber was sealed approximately 1150 CE, and the metal tablet dates to the same period. The implications were staggering: concrete evidence of Norse presence in Oklahoma, nearly 350 years before Columbus reached the Caribbean. More importantly, the hybrid language and integrated cultural symbols demonstrated sustained, peaceful interaction between European and indigenous peoples. This isn't just about who arrived first, Rebecca noted, reviewing the data. It's about how they arrived and what relationships they formed. These weren't conquerors or colonizers. They were refugees seeking new homes, forming alliances, and family bonds with the people already here, which completely contradicts the narrative that European indigenous relations were inevitably characterized by conquest and displacement. Hayes added, her academic mind fully engaged despite her initial skepticism. This shows another path was not just possible, but actually happened. The satellite phone rang their secure line for updates from the courthouse. Michael answered, listening intently before relaying the information. Judge Wilson has agreed to hear arguments from all parties before ruling. The Colonial Heritage Foundation is pushing hard for federal seizure, citing national security interests and preservation concerns. He paused, his expression darkening. They've also filed a motion questioning your mental competence, claiming grief has compromised your judgment. Rebecca felt a flash of anger followed by grim determination. Using James's death against me, that's low even for them. It gets worse, Michael continued. They've submitted a psychological profile suggesting your academic career has predisposed you to find evidence that confirms your political worldview, rather than objective historical truth. Margaret Mankiller, who had approached silently during the conversation, spoke with quiet strength. They attack your credibility because they cannot attack the truth itself. This is the way of those who fear what change might bring. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from the elder's words. Then we continue as planned. The press conference happens at noon, regardless of the court's decision. We present our findings directly to the world while simultaneously publishing everything online. The strategy was bold and risky. By going public before traditional academic validation, Rebecca was breaking with scholarly norms. Her reputation would suffer among conservative academics, but the transparent approach would prevent the evidence from being buried or controlled by any single institution. I need to prepare my statement, she said, turning toward the house, and check that the livestream setup is ready. Inside, the ranch house barely resembled the quiet, grief-filled space she had inherited months ago. Every room buzzed with activity: researchers finalizing presentations, technical staff testing broadcasting equipment, tribal representatives preparing cultural context materials. What had once been a symbol of James's seemingly foolish investment had transformed into the center of a historical revolution. In James's office, now her command center, Rebecca found Thorson on a video call with colleagues in Norway. The silver-haired scholar acknowledged her with a nod as he continued his conversation in rapid Norwegian. When he finished, he turned to her with evident excitement. The Norwegian Historical Museum is holding an emergency board meeting. Based on our findings and the corroborating evidence from family histories in their archives, they're prepared to issue a formal statement supporting our conclusions about pre-Columbian Norse settlement in this region. That's significant international validation, Rebecca noted, especially coming from a Norwegian institution. More than significant, it's unprecedented, Thorson replied. Academic institutions typically wait years before endorsing controversial findings. Their willingness to move quickly suggests they've had corroborating evidence all along, just lacking the concrete proof your discovery provides. The satellite phone rang again. This time, it was their legal team at the courthouse. The judge has called a recess to review documents, Michael reported after taking the call. But there's a development. The Department of Interior has sent representatives arguing for a third option, declaring the site a National Historical Landmark under their jurisdiction. Rebecca considered this new complication. That could actually work in our favor. Federal landmark status would prevent the Colonial Heritage Foundation from gaining control, while still allowing our research to continue under the Trust's guidance. If the department recognizes the Trust's authority, Michael cautioned, they might try to sideline your oversight. The morning progressed with tense efficiency as they prepared for every possible outcome. At 11:30, with the press conference approaching and still no word from the courthouse, Rebecca gathered her core team for final preparations. We proceed as planned, she confirmed. Michael will update us on the court's decision when it comes, but regardless, we share what we found with the world today. She looked around at the unlikely alliance that had formed tribal elders and European academics, government researchers, and independent scholars, all united by the pursuit of a historical truth too significant to remain hidden. Remember why we're doing this, she continued. This isn't about academic prestige or institutional control. It's about restoring a missing chapter in our shared history, one that shows a different path was not just possible but actually taken, a path of cooperation rather than conquest. Margaret, who had been quietly observing, added, For centuries, my people were told our memories of the Shield brothers were myths, that we had confused timelines or invented stories after European contact. Today, our oral traditions are validated, not just as cultural heritage, but as historical fact. The emotion in the elder's voice reminded everyone of the human impact of their work. This wasn't merely an academic exercise, but a healing of historical wounds, a restoration of truth that had been deliberately buried. As they moved toward the barn where the press conference would be held, Rebecca felt a profound connection to the land beneath her feet. The failing ranch that had seemed like such a burden had revealed its true purpose, not as agricultural land but as the keeper of a sacred truth, waiting for the right guardian to arrive. The scene that greeted them was both heartening and intimidating. News crews from major networks had gathered, their satellite trucks lining the perimeter. Representatives from tribal nations across North America stood alongside academic delegations. At the back, Rebecca noticed federal agents observing with careful neutrality, neither interfering nor supporting. The satellite phone buzzed just as Rebecca took her position at the podium. Michael checked it and gave her a subtle nod, the signal they had agreed upon. The court had ruled. She would learn the details later, but for now, she had a more important task. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady despite the cameras and the weight of the moment. My name is Dr. Rebecca Blackwood, anthropologist and trustee of the Blackwood Nighthawk Historical Trust. 8 months ago, I became the reluctant inheritor of this ranch following my husband's unexpected death. What seemed like a financial burden has revealed itself as something far more significant, the site of a historical truth that changes our understanding of American origins. The cameras focused intently as Rebecca continued. Beneath the stone barn on this property, we discovered a sealed chamber containing artifacts and documents that provide irrefutable evidence of sustained, peaceful interaction between Norse travelers and Cherokee ancestors beginning around 1150 CE, nearly 350 years before Columbus. Murmurs spread through the assembled press as Rebecca gestured to the screen behind her, which displayed high-resolution images of the artifacts. These findings have been independently verified by laboratories in 3 countries. The hybrid writing system combining Norse runes and Cherokee symbolic language demonstrates not just contact but cultural exchange and integration between these peoples. For the next 20 minutes, Rebecca methodically presented their evidence, supported by brief statements from Thorson on Norse connections and Margaret on Cherokee oral traditions. The presentation was deliberately transparent, sharing not just conclusions, but the methodologies used to reach them, inviting verification rather than demanding blind acceptance. We stand at a moment of historical reckoning, Rebecca concluded. The narrative that European arrival in the Americas inevitably meant conquest and displacement is challenged by this evidence of a different first contact, one characterized by cooperation, cultural exchange, and peaceful coexistence. This truth has been preserved by generations of guardians, both indigenous and of mixed heritage, waiting for the moment when our society was ready to receive it. As she opened the floor for questions, Michael approached with a note. Reading it quickly, Rebecca felt a surge of relief and vindication. Judge Wilson had denied the Colonial Heritage Foundation's request for seizure, instead granting the site interim National Historical Landmark status under the joint stewardship of the Rebecca Blackwood Nighthawk Trust and the Department of Interior. Their strategy had worked. The artifacts would remain on site, with research continuing under Rebecca's guidance while receiving federal protection. The press conference extended well beyond its planned duration as journalists asked thoughtful, probing questions. To Rebecca's surprise, even typically skeptical reporters seemed moved by the evidence and its implications. The story was resonating not just as an archaeological curiosity, but as a meaningful reconsideration of American origins. As evening approached and the formal press activities concluded, Rebecca found herself standing once again in the stone barn, gazing down at the chamber that had changed everything. The failing ranch that had seemed like her husband's final mistake had proven to be his greatest legacy, and now hers. "You did well today," came Margaret's voice as the elder joined her. "The truth has been honored. This is just the beginning." Rebecca replied, "There will be pushback, attempts to discredit our findings or minimize their significance." "Of course," Margaret agreed. "Truth that challenges power is never welcomed easily. But such truth has a life of its own once released. It cannot be unnamed or unseen." The sound of footsteps announced Michael's arrival. "You should see this," he said, holding out his tablet. On the screen, news websites around the world featured headlines about their discovery. Social media was erupting with discussion. The story had captured global imagination. "It's happening even faster than we anticipated," Rebecca observed. "The world was ready for this truth." "Perhaps that's why the chamber revealed itself now," Margaret suggested. "The guardians of old believed the knowledge should remain hidden until humanity needed it, until the divisions created by false narratives became too damaging to sustain." Rebecca considered this wisdom as they walked back to the ranch house together. The property that had once represented financial burden and painful memories now hummed with renewed purpose. Research teams would remain for months, carefully documenting every aspect of the chamber and its contents. The Blackwood Nighthawk Trust would oversee educational programs, sharing this new understanding of American origins. The failing ranch had transformed into a center for historical reconciliation. As darkness fell, Rebecca found herself drawn to James's favorite spot, a simple bench overlooking the eastern pasture. How many evenings had he sat here, connected to this land in ways she was only beginning to understand? Had he known what lay beneath the barn when he purchased the property, or had he been guided by some deeper intuition, some ancestral memory calling him home? "I thought I might find you here," came an unexpected voice. Rebecca turned to see Dr. Hayes approaching in the twilight. The Smithsonian director's transformation from skeptic to ally had been one of the day's most surprising developments. "It's been quite a day," Rebecca acknowledged, making room on the bench. Hayes sat, her professional demeanor softening in. "The evening quiet. I owe you an apology, Professor Blackwood. I approached your discovery with institutional bias rather than scholarly openness. The evidence you've presented is compelling beyond reasonable doubt." "What changed your perspective?" Rebecca asked. Many academics would dig in rather than reconsider. Hayes was silent for a moment before answering. "Two things. First, the technical evidence is simply too substantial to dismiss the dating. The linguistic analysis, the corroborating Norse family histories, but more personally," she hesitated. "My grandmother was Cherokee. Family stories mention pale visitors who came before Columbus, but I dismissed them as myths incorporated after European contact, just as my academic training taught me to do." The personal revelation highlighted what made this discovery so powerful. It validated not just archaeological evidence, but living cultural memory, stories dismissed as myths by colonial education systems. "Today marks a beginning, not an end," Hayes continued. "The Smithsonian would be honored to collaborate with the Trust on ongoing research and educational programs, not to control the narrative, but to help share it appropriately." Their conversation was interrupted by Thorson, who approached with evident excitement. "Rebecca, the Norwegian government has issued a formal statement acknowledging the validity of our findings. They're proposing an international research partnership to explore the full extent of pre-Columbian Norse indigenous relations." The news represented another level of validation, state-level recognition that would make it even harder for critics to dismiss their work as fringe scholarship. The ripples from their discovery were spreading far beyond academic circles, challenging foundational narratives about American origins. As Thorson and Hayes discussed the implications of Norwegian involvement, Rebecca noticed something unexpected, a soft blue glow emanating from the direction of the barn. Excusing herself, she walked toward the phenomenon, drawn by instinct more than rationality. The stone barn stood silhouetted against the night sky, but the strange illumination seemed to be coming from beneath it, from the chamber itself. As Rebecca approached, she found Margaret already there, watching the ethereal light with knowing eyes. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked softly. "The awakening completes itself," Margaret replied. "The knowledge has been shared, the truth released into the world. The guardianship passes fully to you now." Rebecca felt a strange resonance as she entered the barn and approached the chamber opening. The blue light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, emanating from the metal tablet they had discovered. As she descended the ladder into the ancient space, the illumination intensified, responding to her presence. The tablet, secured in its climate-controlled case, glowed with an inner light that seemed impossible by any scientific standard. The symbols etched into its surface appeared to shift slightly, as if alive with meaning beyond their physical form. "I don't understand," Rebecca whispered, though part of her sensed what was happening at a level deeper than conscious thought. "Understanding comes in many forms," Margaret said, joining her in the chamber. "Your mind has accepted the evidence, but now your spirit accepts the guardianship. The old ones had ways of ensuring the truth would be protected, not just by knowledge, but by connection." As Rebecca approached the glowing tablet, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if completing a journey she hadn't known she was on. The failing ranch that had seemed like such a burden had been waiting for her all along. Its apparent financial troubles ensuring it would pass into the hands of its intended guardian. James knew, she realized aloud. Not just intellectually, but at this deeper level, he felt the connection. And now it passes to you, Margaret confirmed. Not because you inherited this land, but because you understand where the truth it holds matters, how it heals rather than divides. The blue light gradually faded as Rebecca stood in silent communion with the ancient chamber. When it finally returned to normal, she felt irrevocably changed, connected to a lineage of guardians stretching back centuries, all dedicated to preserving a truth too important to lose but too challenging to reveal before its time. As they climbed back into the moonlit barn, Rebecca found Michael waiting anxiously. What happened? We saw the light from the house. Before Rebecca could answer, her phone rang, the regular one, not their secure line. The caller ID showed an unexpected name, President Alexandra Morales. Professor Blackwood, came the distinguished voice when Rebecca answered. I've been briefed on your extraordinary discovery. The White House would like to arrange a visit, not to interfere, but to acknowledge the historical significance of what you found. The presidential interest represented the highest possible validation, a recognition that this discovery transcended academic debate to touch on fundamental questions of national identity and origin. After completing the call, Rebecca shared the news with her astonished colleagues. The president will visit next week. This has reached the highest levels of government, which means the highest levels of resistance as well, Thorson cautioned. The Colonial Heritage Foundation has powerful allies who won't abandon conventional narratives easily. Let them come, Rebecca replied with newfound certainty. The truth has its own power once released. We've ensured it can't be contained again. As they walked back to the ranch house together, tribal elder, Norse scholar, legal advisor, and reluctant widow turned guardian Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief that had nearly overwhelmed her after James's death had transformed into purpose. The financial burden of a failing ranch had revealed itself as a priceless historical treasure. What had seemed like an ending had become a beginning. In the days that followed, Rebecca watched as the impact of their discovery spread like ripples in still water. School textbooks would need revision. Museums would create new exhibits. Indigenous claims about historical memory would receive fresh consideration. Most importantly, Americans would confront a more complex origin story, one that offered alternative templates for cross-cultural relations beyond conquest and domination. 1 month after the initial revelation, Rebecca stood on her porch at sunrise, watching as the first visitor center buildings took shape near the property entrance. The Blackwood Nighthawk Historical Site would welcome its first public tours in the spring, sharing the remarkable story of Norse Cherokee cooperation with a world ready to receive this healing truth. Michael joined her, coffee in hand, as had become their morning ritual. Hard to believe this was a failing ranch not so long ago, he observed. Now it's possibly the most significant historical site in America. Rebecca smiled, thinking of how differently she now viewed her inheritance. It was never failing, it was waiting. All those equipment breakdowns, the water problems, the price drops that scared away other buyers, they ensured the property would pass to its intended guardian. That sounds almost mystical for an anthropologist, Michael teased gently. Perhaps. Some truths require both scientific and spiritual understanding, Rebecca replied, her perspective forever changed by what she had experienced. James knew that. It took me longer to learn. As the Oklahoma sun illuminated the transformed landscape, Rebecca Blackwood embraced her unexpected calling, not just as property owner or academic researcher, but as guardian of a truth with the power to heal historical wounds. The failing ranch that had seemed like her husband's final mistake had revealed itself as his greatest gift, and through it, she had discovered not just ancient artifacts but her own deepest purpose. The widow who had inherited a burden had become the keeper of a blessing, one that would change not just her own life, but the way a nation understood its beginnings. In the chamber beneath the stone barn, generations of guardians had preserved evidence of a different first contact, a different template for human relations across cultures. Now that truth belonged to the world, offering hope that what had happened once could happen again, that cooperation rather than conquest remained a viable path forward. As Rebecca stepped into the new day, she carried this knowledge not as academic theory, but as lived experience, the transformation of apparent failure into profound purpose, of ending into beginning, of inheritance into destiny. The failing ranch had never been failing at all. It had been waiting for the right guardian, the right moment, and the courage to let an ancient truth shine forth once more. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.